The wind howled through the barren field, its icy breath biting at anything exposed. In the distance, a dilapidated barn stood like a ghost of what it once had been, its walls sagging and its roof barely holding on to what was left of its structure. In the middle of this desolation stood a horse, Rusty. His coat, once a deep chestnut brown, had faded to a dull, patchy yellow. His ribs were visible beneath the thin layer of fur, and his legs trembled with the weight of malnutrition. He stood there, alone, a faint glimmer of his former self. There was no one to watch over him, no one to care for him. Rusty had been abandoned, left in this cold, unforgiving field to fend for himself. Days turned into weeks, and weeks bled into months. The world had forgotten him, and he had forgotten how to trust. The old barn was a shelter in name only, providing no warmth or safety. Rusty's only companions were the crows that circled overhead, their sharp calls echoing in the silent expanse. The grasses that once grew tall and lush around him had withered away, leaving the land dry and cracked. The small pond that had once been a life-giving source of water had become nothing more than a puddle in the dirt, barely enough to wet his parched lips. No one came to check on him. No one heard his silent cries for help. But Rusty had always been strong. He had known life before the field, a life of running through wide open spaces, of playing in the pastures with other horses, of feeling the wind in his mane. He remembered those days, and though they seemed like a distant dream, they kept him going. But now, those memories were slowly fading, swallowed by the weight of loneliness and hunger. It wasn't always like this. There had been a time when he had been part of a family that loved him, cared for him, rode him through fields of green, brushed his coat, and gave him treats after a long day. He could almost still hear the voice of the young girl who used to call his name with laughter in her voice, her hands soft as she fed him apples. She had promised him that they would always be together. But the promise was a lie. Rusty didn't know how long he had been abandoned. Days and nights blurred together in a haze of hunger and thirst. The sounds of the world beyond the field were foreign to him now, the memory of civilization fading away. His world had shrunk to the size of that empty field, that lonely barn, and the pain that gnawed at his stomach. Then, one evening, something changed. As the sun set low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Rusty's ears pricked up. For the first time in months, he heard footsteps. Soft at first, then louder. He froze, his heart beating faster, the sound stirring something inside him that he thought had long since died. Someone was coming. Could it be someone who cared? Was this the end of his suffering, or was it just another cruel twist of fate? The steps grew closer. Rusty's eyes, dull and weary, began to shine with a glimmer of hope. He stood still, waiting, praying that this time, it was real. The figure that appeared on the horizon was small, almost invisible against the setting sun. As it drew closer, Rusty could see that it was a woman, her face obscured by the shadows. She was dressed in worn clothing, with a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. In her hand, she held a bucket, though Rusty couldn't yet see what was inside. The woman stopped at the edge of the field, looking at him with a gaze that was both compassionate and sorrowful. Rusty's heart raced in his chest. Could this be the moment he had been waiting for? Could she be the one to save him? But as the woman took a few more steps forward, Rusty's hope began to wane. She did not reach out to him, did not speak to him in gentle tones. Instead, she lowered her head and seemed to study him carefully. "You're not going to make it, are you?" she murmured, her voice soft but filled with the weight of years of experience. "Not alone in this place. Not like this." Rusty's ears drooped, the hope fading as quickly as it had come. She wasn't here to help him. She was here to assess him, to judge whether he was worth saving. The woman knelt down beside the empty water trough and dipped the bucket into what little water remained. She brought it to her lips, tasting it with a look of disgust before setting it back down. Her eyes never left Rusty. "This place is killing you," she said, more to herself than to him. "But I don't know what I can do. I don't know if there's anything left of you to save." With that, she turned and started to walk away. Rusty watched her leave, his heart sinking deeper into the pit of despair. She had come, yes, but she had left him just like everyone else. But as the darkness of the evening began to settle over the field, something remarkable happened. The woman stopped at the edge of the fence and turned back. For a long moment, she simply stood there, looking at him. And then, without a word, she walked back toward him. This time, she didn't stop. She came right to him, her hands reaching out gently. She touched his matted coat, her fingers trembling with what seemed like both sadness and hope. Rusty stood stock still, uncertain, but his heart swelled just the same. Was she really going to help him? Slowly, carefully, she ran her fingers along his rib cage, and he felt the barest flicker of warmth spread through his bones. For the first time in what felt like forever, Rusty didn't feel completely alone. "I'm not leaving you," the woman whispered. And in that moment, Rusty's heart believed her. He had no way of knowing what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he had hope. And sometimes, hope was enough. The days that followed were unlike any Rusty had experienced before. The woman, whose name was Clara, returned every morning, sometimes twice a day, bringing with her food, water, and the promise of a better life. The first few days, Rusty could hardly believe it. He was used to being ignored, to suffering in silence, but Clara treated him as if he were the most important being in the world. She spoke to him softly, sometimes singing, sometimes just whispering words of comfort that soothed his weary soul. At first, Rusty was cautious. He was used to the sting of betrayal, used to being forgotten and abandoned. But Clara didn't give up on him. She patiently gained his trust, offering him food from her hand, coaxing him to take a few steps closer to her each day. When he finally allowed her to brush him, the relief he felt was indescribable, almost as if she were removing the weight of years of neglect from his bones. The dirt, the matted fur, the pain, it all started to loosen, and for the first time in months, he felt the gentle touch of kindness on his body. Clara worked tirelessly, bringing him hay, oats, and fresh water. But the most miraculous thing of all was the way she made him feel. She wasn't just feeding him, she was feeding his spirit. Rusty began to stand a little taller. His eyes, once clouded with despair, started to shine with a flicker of recognition, a recognition that, perhaps, life could be good again. Perhaps, he could be whole again. But there were challenges. Clara quickly realized that Rusty was not just physically weak, his emotional scars ran deep. Each time she came close to his face, he flinched as if expecting a blow. When she reached for his back, he would tense, like he was bracing for something terrible. The trauma he had suffered ran deeper than the malnutrition that had nearly hollowed him out. Clara didn't push him. She gave him space when he needed it, never forcing him into a situation that made him uncomfortable. She knew that healing couldn't be rushed, and she was patient. Every day, she worked to rebuild Rusty's trust in the world around him, to show him that there were still people who cared. The first time Rusty took a step toward her without hesitation was a breakthrough. It happened in the early morning light, the mist still hanging heavy over the field. Clara had just finished filling the trough with water and was standing a few feet away, watching him, when he slowly, gingerly, walked up to her. He stopped just in front of her, his head low and his eyes filled with uncertainty. Clara didn't move. She held her breath, afraid that even the smallest motion would scare him off. For what felt like an eternity, they stood there in silence, the world frozen around them. Then, Rusty took one more cautious step forward. He nudged her hand gently, just a soft, tentative touch, like he was testing the waters. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she reached down to stroke his neck. The connection was fleeting, but in that moment, it felt like they had crossed a barrier. Rusty had taken a chance. He had decided to trust her. Over the next few weeks, Rusty's transformation became more and more visible. His coat grew shinier, his ribs less pronounced. His step became stronger, more sure, and his eyes, once dull and haunted, now sparkled with a new vitality. He began to play, too, something Clara hadn't thought possible. One morning, as she approached with a bucket of oats, she saw Rusty running around the field, kicking up his heels and galloping across the ground. The joy that filled the space between them was palpable. It was a joy they had both almost forgotten. Clara watched from the edge of the field, a smile spreading across her face. This was a different Rusty. This was the horse he was meant to be, the one he had been before the darkness of abandonment had closed in on him. But as much as Rusty had started to heal, Clara knew the work was far from over. The physical changes were easier to see, but the emotional healing would take much longer. She spent hours each day working with him, talking to him, encouraging him. They would take walks together, Clara walking beside him, guiding him as he grew more confident in himself. She started to take him for short rides, just around the field, always keeping the pace slow, always listening for signs of discomfort or fear. As Rusty grew stronger, Clara made plans. She had heard of a nearby animal shelter that specialized in rehabilitating horses, a place where they could provide more extensive care and resources. Rusty's recovery had been extraordinary, but she knew he still needed more than she could give him on her own. The idea of sending him away was a painful one. Clara had grown attached to him, and the thought of not being there every day to help him through the next phase of his recovery tugged at her heart. But she also knew it was the right thing to do. Rusty deserved more than the barren field and the woman who could only offer him what she had. He deserved a future where he could run free, where he could be part of a community of other horses who had known similar pain and who could help him heal even more. One cold morning, Clara made the decision. She would take Rusty to the shelter. She would give him the chance he deserved, the chance to be whole again, the chance to be loved by others who understood what it meant to overcome suffering. It was a difficult decision, but she knew it was the right one. Rusty had healed enough to leave, and now it was time for him to take that next step in his journey. Clara gently led Rusty toward the trailer that would carry him to his new home. His steps were slower now, but still strong, still filled with purpose. He turned his head and looked back at her, his dark eyes full of gratitude and trust. "I'll miss you," Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Rusty nickered softly, his head dipping in acknowledgement. Then, without another word, he climbed into the trailer, ready for whatever came next. And so, with one final look at the field that had once been his prison, Rusty left behind the past he had survived, ready to face the future that was waiting for him. The journey to the shelter was quiet, the kind of quiet that only the open road can bring. Clara drove slowly, her hands gripping the wheel of the old truck, her thoughts racing. She glanced back at the trailer through the rearview mirror, watching for any signs that Rusty might be uneasy, but the only movement she saw was the rhythmic swaying of the trailer as it bounced gently over the road. Rusty was calm, more calm than he had been in weeks. His trust in Clara had deepened, and he seemed to understand, on some level, that this was a new chapter in his life, a chapter that could lead to something better. The past, though painful, was finally behind him. As they neared the shelter, Clara's heart began to beat faster. She hadn't been sure what to expect when she'd first heard about it, but now, seeing the large gates and the green pastures that stretched beyond them, she could feel her anxiety rising. This place was supposed to be a haven for horses like Rusty, horses who had suffered, horses who needed more than a loving hand. They needed a community of care, of expertise. But would they be able to offer him the same level of attention she had? Would he be able to adapt to the change? The truck rolled to a stop just inside the shelter's gates. As Clara stepped out, the sound of hooves thundering from a distance greeted her. She turned and saw a group of horses grazing peacefully in a large pasture, their sleek coats glinting in the sunlight. Some of them raised their heads to look at the newcomer, their ears flicking in curiosity. Rusty, too, seemed to sense something. As Clara opened the trailer door, he took a few hesitant steps forward, his eyes wide and alert. He looked at the other horses, and for the first time in a long time, a glimmer of excitement sparked in his eyes. He had spent so long in solitude, but now there were others. Horses, his own kind. Clara led him carefully from the trailer, and Rusty stepped out, his legs a bit wobbly but steady. The shelter staff, who had been expecting them, approached with gentle hands and soothing words. One of them, a tall man named Tom, smiled warmly at Clara. "You brought him here just in time," Tom said as he took the lead rope from her. "He's a lucky horse to have found you." Clara smiled weakly, her heart heavy with the bitter sweetness of the moment. "He's been through a lot," she said softly. "I just hope he's ready for what's next." Tom nodded, his expression serious but compassionate. "He'll be in good hands here. We've got plenty of room for him to stretch his legs and plenty of folks who understand horses like him. Don't worry, we'll make sure he gets everything he needs." Clara watched as Tom led Rusty toward the pasture, and her heart ached as the distance between them grew. She had grown so attached to him, and the thought of leaving him behind left a lump in her throat. But she knew this was right. Rusty needed more than she could offer on her own. As they reached the other horses, Rusty hesitated for just a moment, his head low, eyes flicking nervously from one horse to another. Then, something changed. One of the horses, a large, chestnut gelding with a white star on his forehead, took a few steps forward. He nickered softly and stretched his neck toward Rusty, as if to say, "You're not alone anymore." Rusty, after a few moments of stillness, took a tentative step toward the gelding. The two horses stood there for a long moment, their faces close together. It was as if Rusty was saying goodbye to his fears, saying goodbye to the solitude that had kept him prisoner for so long. He was ready to embrace this new life, ready to belong. Clara watched them for a moment, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and sorrow. This was the moment she had hoped for, the moment that Rusty would be free to heal fully, to find his place among others like him. She wasn't abandoning him, she was setting him free. After a long breath, Clara turned to Tom, her voice trembling slightly. Thank you for giving him a chance." Tom smiled gently. "It's what we do here. He'll get the care he deserves, I promise." Clara nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She turned away, knowing that this was the hardest part. As she made her way back to her truck, she glanced back one last time. Rusty was standing with the other horses now, his head lifted high, his body relaxed. He wasn't the same horse who had first stood alone in that barren field. He was stronger, more confident, and surrounded by others who understood his pain and his journey. For the first time in what felt like forever, Rusty was not alone. The road home was long, but it felt different this time. There was a peace in Clara's heart, knowing that Rusty was in good hands. She thought of all the time they had shared, the moments of quiet connection, the joy of watching him come back to life. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. When Clara returned home, she didn't feel the emptiness she had feared. She knew she had done everything she could for Rusty. And she knew that, in the end, he had found his place in the world. The field where he had been left behind was now just a distant memory, a reminder of how far he had come. As the months passed, Clara received updates from the shelter. Rusty had settled in beautifully. He had made new friends, and his health had continued to improve. There were even reports of him galloping joyfully in the pastures, his coat shining brightly in the sunlight. Clara would visit him from time to time, and every time she saw him, she was amazed by how much he had blossomed. He was no longer the broken horse she had found in that desolate field. He was vibrant, full of life, and he had found a new family. And so, Rusty's journey came full circle. From the darkness of neglect and abandonment to the light of healing and hope, he had found his way. The horse who had once been left alone, forgotten by the world, had found a place where he belonged, a place of care, understanding, and love. And Clara, though she missed him, knew that Rusty's story had only just begun.